Welcome to Potentiality, a space for big questions, deep conversations, and shared wisdom around the most meaningful thing we do as human beings, which is how we parent and educate the next generation. I'd like to introduce today's guest, Cornelia Dahinten, a therapist, conscious parenting educator, and the founder of Conscious Connections Consulting. Cornelia works with individuals, couples, and parents, helping them understand the deeper patterns that shape their relationships with themselves, with partners, and their children. Her approach is rooted in connection, awareness, and attachment, guiding people to move beyond reactivity and into more conscious, grounded, and authentic ways of relating. Cornelia, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you today. We're going to talk about strong-willed children. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Alina. And I love the topic of strong-willed children. Yeah, I'm excited. Let's see.
Thank you so much. The reason I think I'm super excited to explore this with you because I know you have extensive background in working with youth who would be, just categorized as strong-willed. My personal interest comes from me being a strong-willed child growing up, and I remember how difficult it was, the dynamics with my parents, particularly with my mother. And I had the blessing and the privilege of raising two strong-willed sons. So I know how challenging the dynamics can be on both ends. So I wanted to explore this deeper and just shed some light to some aspects of this for the audience. And I want to start by just framing this conversation and who strong-willed children really are. And we often hear of them of the term strong-willed child with a lot of frustration. And I know this because with over 20 years of experience in the field of education, having worked with thousands of youth, children and adolescents, it can create a lot of challenges and sense of frustration on behalf of the adults. And so I want to start us with defining who strong-willed children are and what do most parents understand or misunderstand, rather, about this temperament? So let's give a brief definition of who strong-willed children are.
Thank you so much for actually starting with that because I feel there's so much misunderstanding about what parents call strong-willed children. And I actually think what they say is children that they find difficult to handle. And I don't actually think it's always strong-willed. Often children who are quite anxious are called strong-willed. Children who may be slightly on the spectrum are often called strong-willed. So very often it's children who actually battle with something that they cannot either hold back their impulses. I mean, most children can't hold back their impulses, but to a bigger degree, or who have extremely strong emotions. Highly sensitive children are also always called strong-willed children when they're basically communicating an emotion that is difficult for the parent to digest. Now, in my world,
Mhm.
strong-willed children who deserve the name are children who are not easily compliant, who stand up for what they want to do. They keep asking for their needs, and so on. That is what really deserves the word strong-willed. The other categories are just experienced as not easy to handle for the parent who is using the word strong-willed. And that may be because that parent has a very low tolerance of whatever they're experiencing. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And there's just so many things that I would like to unpack with you just from this response only, because you really alluded to the parent's capacity to just guide this child and support them and nurture them. So it's not necessarily that the child presents a challenge. It's really the capacity of the parent that cannot be big enough, with what they're presented. And also, you mentioned the sensitivity and being an empath. I can absolutely relate to this and how sensitive people in general and youth in particular, without even knowing how sensitive they are, they can, because they experience the world at a much different level of depth, what they see and what can potentially become challenging or overwhelming for them is not necessarily what the parents understand. So I
Yeah.
want you to just kind of go a little more deep into the parent capacity. What does it really mean for a parent if they have a child, to nurture and to raise, who shows that type of a temperament or maybe high sensitivity? So let's just talk a little bit about that, because I also feel like children, all children are, and particularly these children, they're a mirror to the parent. So what is it that they're mirroring maybe to the parent that the parent need to maybe unpack or dig deeper for?
Yeah, wonderful. So, okay, how do I start with this? I think one of the most important things to understand is that having a child will bring out your deepest attachment patterns. What does an attachment pattern mean? Basically, is how did I learn to connect to the people around me? How did I learn to receive love? What does love look like? How did I learn to deal with my emotions? How can my emotions show up in a connection, in a relationship? Now, if you imagine a parent having a certain experience with their parents, then the children actually operate like a replication of that mirror. It's like mirroring the experience that I had with my parents. Now, I am I am experiencing very similar feelings in the relationship with my children to the relationship with my parents. A lot of parents are actually worried that their children will feel like them
Mhm.
in the relationship to them. But that's not the danger. The danger is that you will feel the same as you felt with your parents. Now, imagine a person who has experienced love in a very restrictive way.
Mhm.
Maybe your parents taught you that you should not demonstrate feelings, that you should never ask for needs, that their feelings are always more important, which will program your nervous system and your experience system and your expectation. It will shape your culture. So now you are going to use that on the experience with your child. Very often, not even age appropriate, right? So let's imagine a parent who experienced very restrictive parenting and all of this was not allowed, then a child is communicating an emotion or has difficulty to adjust to a certain situation and is
Mhm.
feeling an emotion that you were not allowed to feel. Now, because you come from this sort of parenting, you don't know what to do with this emotion because you created a survival mechanism, maybe bottling up, maybe dissociating from it, maybe whatever that may be. Now you will try to make your child use that same survival mechanism. And if your child doesn't do that, it will really trigger you because your whole system doesn't know how to deal with that. And that is what's happening often in the strong-willed child label. My child is feeling something that I don't know how to handle because my child refuses to use the mechanics that I used to use and I want my child to do. Like, shh, don't say anything. Just pretend it's not happening or whatever that may be. This is rude. This is not respectful, whatever we heard. Is
Mhm.
that making sense?
Absolutely. And I'm listening to you, and I feel like you're describing my childhood, like
Mm,
to the T, because that was my experience growing up. Emotions were not allowed, they were not talked about. So I knew as a child, especially as a highly sensitive child, is to suppress it, which ultimately creates dissociation, all kinds of challenges. You internalize all the beliefs about yourself that something is wrong with you, like you are the problem, and then you almost transfer those patterns onto your child when you're presented with a sensitive child or emotional child, or just the child who is expressing their emotions in a
yeah.
different way that you're used to. And that's such a typical pattern, and it definitely goes back to the attachment patterns that we've inherited and we've developed as a survival mechanism, as you said. So Now, the goal really becomes like, how do we change our patterns as parents? Because we want to honor the full spectrum, the emotional spectrum of the child, just to really attune with them and help them understand how to work with emotions, to develop that emotional intelligence, which is really it's more important if you really look at the data, the research, than IQ, which is the cognitive intelligence, because in human relationships, that's really what defines us. And so you speak about conscious parenting as an inward journey. And so, what does it really mean to be a conscious parent for a so-called strong-willed child?
Yeah. So if you think about how what I just described, right? I'm experiencing something, I'm facing something that I don't know how to do. So it's really when I parent consciously, first of all, I need to understand what am I bringing to this relationship? What is my history that I am bringing to this relationship? Then I need to understand, okay, what are age-appropriate things for my child to do, to experience? Kind of I mean, you don't have to turn into a psychologist, but a bit of a, what is possible to be expected in terms of impulse control, executive skills, these kind of things that your child would need to behave in certain ways. So conscious parenting educates on that. What can I expect? How do I build connection? What does it take for two people to actually connect? So many of us have been raised by emotionally non-available parents
Mhm.
because humanity has been battered by wars, by traumas of all sorts, and people who are traumatized, they are not emotionally available. So I need to
Mhm.
learn, how can I actually be emotionally available? What am I bringing to the relationship? What can I expect from my child? And then how can I give space for my child, for me to discover and for them to discover who they are?
Mhm.
So if I have a vision, a goal, most parents have very similar goals. Like they want their children to be resilient, confident, loving, and somehow civilized, like able to integrate into societies, right? Most parents have these goals. Some parents have a little bit of differentiation in that, but not really. So if I have that as a goal, if I want a competent, civilized, loving, confident, resilient adult, how do I get there from here?
Mhm.
And it's about understanding the different steps on the way in which I will be faced with different challenges, and how can I maneuver myself through that? As in learning, going inward, how do I respond to my child? What does it bring out in me as a mirror? For example, which is the emotion that I cannot digest? What is it
Mhm.
that I can't handle here? And then turning towards actually the gift that this presents, which is the opportunity to learn it. Now, it does sounds easy, but it's actually hard. It's hard to learn something while you also have to teach it, right?
Absolutely, especially if you're already triggered, right? Because this is a new learning for you. You really need to be conscious enough to repattern yourself, in other words. And what your child does, it really triggers, all those unprocessed things in you. So you need to be able to have the capacity of holding what the child is presenting while you're doing almost your inner work, in
Yeah,
order to be able to be the container for a child to process their own emotions. And it
yeah,
is challenging work. So what
very.
I hear you say is like, it's really going from how do I control this behavior? Because oftentimes that's the impulse of the adult.
Yeah.
Whether it's a parent, it's an educator. I've seen that, with both groups, to go from what is behavior communicating and how do I authentically connect with the person in front of me in
Right.
order to be able to help them process their emotions.
100%. 100% exactly like that. It is about what is the behavior communicating. It's a discovery, right? It's an inquiry rather than a judgment. And I feel that is probably the biggest shift that we can learn in any relationship, but it's so fundamental in actually raising psychologically healthy humans to stop constantly judging our children, wanting to fix and correct behavior as if they were little machines, but more thinking, what is my child going through? What are their strengths and how can I support them in learning what they need to learn to be the person that they can be? Who are they and what are the tools they need to be fully in their power?
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for framing it. It was a beautiful response, and that's exactly what my work is dedicated to, is to help the adults to see into the child and to help them bring out, the best in them
Yeah.
through that attuned connection. Now, what I do find, and I really want to hear from your experience, Cornelia, if you find a lot of power struggles in the daily reality of parents who have a so-called strong-willed child, and what is really actually happening in those moments in both sides. We already talked about the parent being triggered and not really knowing how to respond because they never really practice, they never built that capacity. But do you really observe power struggles in the dynamics and how traditional discipline approaches maybe help or escalate actually this type of a power struggle dynamics? What do you see in your experience?
So I feel the second you have a power struggle, you're not in the right place
Mhm.
because parenting needs to be a hierarchy. If I'm in a power struggle, I lose the hierarchy and I'm headbutting with my child. That's not where I can parent from. I need to get out of the power struggle, get back into the hierarchy. And people may immediately misunderstand that with being top-down authoritarian. But for me, hierarchy just means I'm holding the space without having to join your drama. Now, let's say you're confronted with, you just had a new baby. You already have a toddler. And the toddler, every time you want to put the baby down, starts screaming.
Mhm.
What are you going to do? Scream back? Well, how are you? What will that power battle look like? It's about understanding where is my power? How can I hold this space? And what does my child need? What is my child trying to communicate in this moment? So it is outside of my power to actually make that toddler stop screaming unless I start to hurt him,
Mhm.
right? That would work for that moment of making sure the toddler is quiet. For most children, that would work. But it would really sabotage our long-term goal. It
Mhm.
would really sabotage what actually this child starts to think about themselves. It would really sabotage the relationship and the attunement between me and this child. So what are my options? The only option I have in a circumstance like that is to manipulate and change the environment. So thinking about how can I change this environment so that I can actually create a space in which my baby can sleep and my toddler doesn't need this sort
Mhm.
of alarm raised, right? And sometimes because we live so non-human specific,
Mhm.
that may not be possible. We're not meant to live like that. We're not meant to
Mhm.
live in this modern setup where one mom may be with one, two, or three more children alone,
Mhm.
without help, without a group dynamic, without support, with all the stress and all of that. We're not meant to live like that. And we'll always cause problems that we really have to be quite creative around. But it's about understanding where in this specific moment do I hold the power to change something, to create support, to create something that would help my situation, to help the child, to help me, to help whatever. So once I go into a power battle, I'm not even thinking along those lines. I'm trying to battle my child. And no one can be the winner. If my child loses, that's not good. If I lose, that's not good either.
Mhm.
So get back into a hierarchy and hold the space, really thinking about what is lacking, where do I hold power, and what is needed in this situation to achieve a different outcome. And power battle cannot be the answer.
Mhm. Absolutely. And thank you for voicing the fact that we've normalized this type of living, which is so not aligned with our deeper humanity, like how we evolved as humans. It's really misaligned. So it's really demanding, it's very taxing on that parent who is raising one, two, or three children by themselves without that community support. So thank you for acknowledging that. You spoke to creating an environment, which I think that's really what shapes all of us, the environment that we are brought up, especially as young people in those formative stages, as an infant, as a toddler, up to the age of 7, when our subconscious mind is still fully open. Um, I want to speak to the environment as the nervous system state of the caregiver, because we can do all the things externally, and this is what I see even more often in the classrooms, at home, like in home as well, but also in the classroom, when everything, the structure, like everything, what needs to look like, it's there, but the adult in the room is dysregulated for whatever is happening in their own life, and how that dysregulated nervous system really shapes the environment. It's not really the external things that we've provided, which are also important, but that dysregulated presence, because children really learn regulation through that co-regulation. So how in the moment, an adult who is conscious, going back to that power, when they're triggered by their child, right, by their strong-willed child, what does it look like in the moment for them to come to their regulation in order to shift that environment and help their child kind of down-regulate and then co-regulate to ultimately self-regulate?
Yeah. So I feel that it really, like especially down regulation, depends so much on what this specific child is actually going through. Is this child trying to find power because it feels disempowered, or is this child trying to find regulation because it is so dysregulated, right?
Mhm.
So, and also, I mean, really, the nervous system state of the parent can be dysregulated even though the child may not really doing that much.
Mhm.
So it's about really coming back to yourself and understanding what are you doing? What are you doing and what are you trying to achieve in this moment? So, and you can also do that in hindsight. It doesn't always happen in that moment. On the way to actually mastering this, you will fail many times. But coming back into your own body and realizing calmness can only start with you. And
Mhm.
that's where we are back in hierarchy, right? If you hold the room, everything else can meld into that space, even if it doesn't immediately look regulated. So coming back into your own body and realizing just the physical sensation, what am I feeling? And not everybody can feel that. Some people are very dissociated. Hopefully, people who cannot feel themselves at all would actually go and seek help, because that's one of the major things that you need to be able to do to co-regulate is you need to feel yourself. So that's a big, big red flag. If you cannot feel yourself at all physically, you need help. So,
Mhm.
but let's assume that the parent can actually feel themselves. Go into your body and really just observe the physical sensations. That's a split second. Focus on using the breath to actually start to master your body function. So just slow breaths where you box breathing, I feel, is one that actually
Mhm.
really helps very quite immediately, where you breathe around a square and just the same length. Make it as long as you can. 6 counts may be a good start. 6 in, hold 6, 6 out. You can count quick, depending on how what you're doing as well, right? Out 6, hold 6, and go for a couple of rounds, taking the focus on that. And again, I'm not talking about a long time. I'm just talking about a very short recalibration. Some people, when I recommend to do the what I call robot technique, when everything is totally escalated, let's say you have 3 children jumping around and you realize you came off your hierarchy and you're basically in the pen with them going crazy. And you feel like you're so escalated that you don't know what to do. pretend you are a robot. Take your emotion out of the pen and become purely functional. When you do that, your nervous system will follow because your mind doesn't concentrate on the anymore, right? But you started concentrating on the I'm just functional. Then once you feel it's calming down around me a little bit, you then go inward, feel your body, use your breath, and really imagine yourself being an anchor in the seabed, sinking into the sand. Your kids on a string in their boat going through the hurricane, and you wait for the storm to calm down. There is no parenting in moments like that, or let's put it this way, there's no correction in those moments.
Mhm.
There is no, there is nothing there that you can achieve in a totally escalated moment, but to sit through the storm and use your system for co-regulation. The biochemical power you hold in those moments is massive. So for people to become aware of that power is such an incredible feeling. I still remember when I learned that and the peace that comes to you, because that's again to connect back to earlier, where your power lies.
Mhm.
Your biochemical system is your power. So the misunderstanding that I just have to be physically more dominant to or louder with my screaming to regulate my children, it's just such a hoax that we only believe because we've been parented like that, right?
Mhm.
But the true power lies in the regulation of your system, the breathing, the pulling yourself back into hierarchy, holding space so everybody can melt into it. I hope that made sense.
It made absolute sense. So you're really speaking about the parents' awareness and understanding of their own neurophysiology and what an intelligent avatar that we all have, and really tapping into its potential, but really knowing, like, first of all, having the knowledge and having the practices. So this is not an in the moment thing. This is a practice that every parent really need to adopt and just continuously build the capacity in order to be able to become the container for their children, all of their children, and especially for the strong-willed ones. And
Yeah,
thank you for naming the box breathing. That's one of the techniques that I actually teach to the teenagers that I work with, because it works for every age. And just like we want to teach the parents this regulatory capacity, we ultimately want the youth to also possess that knowledge and also the practices in order to do their part of it, because this is a relational dynamic. It works on both ends.
yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
uh, Cornelia, I was wondering, because I remember, and this is not to blame anyone, and I know every parent does their best, with their knowledge, with ability, given the circumstances that they're in. But growing up, I remember how my will was broken, and almost systematically and methodically. I have all those memories, and I did a lot of trauma healing work to really recover from that. So oftentimes it can feel in the moment that if this strong-willed child who is really pushing all of your boundaries need to be controlled, because they will get out of the control, and it's oftentimes is done for their sake, right? You just really need to become a discipline and just kind of a order people and a person. So what is the difference between breaking the will and guiding it? So how can we still nurture, that strong will as it shows up, and yet have healthy boundaries set up in the parent-child relational dynamics?
Extremely important question. I feel the answer to that really is conversation, listening, kindness, and generosity. So, what do I mean by that? Traditional parenting assumes that they know it, that they know how it works. And I'm prescribing to you, child, how you're going to do it. This is how you are successful, and you have to follow me. But I may not actually be right about that. So sitting down with a child and listening to what is their view on things, maybe keeping things open and assuming that they may have a good idea and that I am open to receive the idea. It may end up not to be a good idea, but it actually, in my experience, my children very often had extremely good ideas.
Mhm.
So I am communicating in a way where I say, look, this is what I would like to achieve. And I think that this may be the right way to get there. But I would be interested in your thoughts. What do you think?
Mhm.
And the answers that I received were very often a lot more considerate, a lot more sensible than I would have expected in the beginning. And my experience very often is that there is a judgment on children that is very unjustified.
Mhm.
And this judgment for children also can be very infuriating. And I experienced that as a child. My parents had judgment on me that was infuriating to me because it was never really even close to the truth. And as a mother, I experienced with my children that, interesting, they actually have a very different thought process to what I would have expected. And I can say the same for my clients that, of course, sometimes children say things or have ideas that maybe are not in the space of possible. But then we explore it a bit further.
Mhm.
What about this is it that you want? What are you trying to achieve? Where do you want to be? How do you think you could get there? Can we communicate about this? If you try this, how can we make sure it's safe? So, I mean, it's when we get into the teenage years, this becomes a lot more about talking and exploring than for a 2-year-old. A
Mhm.
2-year-old, the exploration is very different. If my child thinks it can balance on something that I'm not so sure about, then I don't like let me use this bottle, right?
Mhm.
I can protect them hands off like this, and they still have the experience of falling. I don't have to go like this or tell them you can't do it. I can create spaces and experiences where I am there to support and let them allow them to have an experience that will inform them on a physical and deeply subconscious level without
Mhm.
me deciding that this child should do A, B, or C.
Mhm. Yeah, beautifully explained. Thank you for that. It's really allowing children to explore and at a younger age, just being present to ensure some sort of safety, necessary safety. But for older ones, it's just open communication and really let them explore and allow life to give them feedback rather than us over structuring, in the attempt to protect them from the perceived fear or perceived danger that they might be going into. And thank you so much for really acknowledging the wealth of wisdom that children bring if we're willing to listen. There is an old saying that when the child is born, it's time to listen, it's time to learn, not to teach. And that's definitely how I feel about my own children. I always speak of them as my best teachers in every which way, and just to really allow them to offer to the world what they have come here to offer without us overstructuring and suppressing it. So I want to ask you, Cornelia, what are the gifts of a strong-willed child that often go maybe unrecognized? And if supported well, what kind of adult does a strong-willed child become?
Beautiful question, right? Because I think a lot of people always talk about the challenges, and I always think, isn't that amazing? We need people who stand up strongly for things in this world. We need people who have the guts to stand up to
Mhm.
authority, to question things, because that's how you change things. This is how you bring new, beautiful things into the world. Because if we continue doing everything the same we've always done it, from this top-down assumption that I know best, we will never get anywhere. We'll never have any change. So it's really about supporting a child and teaching them how do you do this in a way that is socially acceptable, that is civilized, that follows your values. What values do you want? So in a reflective way. So if my child wants to do something that I may not feel very comfortable with, how can I support my child to actually think this through so it can be possible? So it's a bit, I guess it's a bit of a growth and fixed mindset question as well.
Mhm.
How are we developing and helping growth mindsets that are challenging the world in a positive way, that bring values that we wanted to install, that they want to install? So I think that's the big gift, actually having people who learn how to change the world.
Absolutely. What I find is strong-willed children, like in my own experience, both personal and professional, they are the creatives, they are the innovators, right? They are those who think outside of the box, and that's why they challenge, they push the boundaries when they're young. And because they are, if nurtured properly, they are the ones to offer something really big to the world. And so
Yeah.
it's really important, I think, on the parent and also educators' behalf to understand that this type of youth, they're not a problem to be fixed, but a different type of intelligence almost that the world needs, and that really needs to be nurtured consciously and intentionally.
Yeah, it's really, I guess if you need an image to guide you, it's really about going down or raising a bully or a leader. They
Mm.
both need the same qualities, or they both have the same qualities. And if a person with these qualities is constantly put down, judged, not met with generosity and kindness, doesn't have a good attuned relationship, they may well turn into a bully. But most parents would rather have a leader as a result of their parenting than a bully, surely. And it's really about how can I help my child to go that path, and becoming more self-aware. And that's, I think, one of the very important points about it is how do we learn to actually master our will, our energy, the qualities that we have. It is by being mirrored back what it is that we're going through so that we have the words to communicate. Because the big difference is sharing an emotion or shaping something around me into something that I want rather than acting on an emotion and being reactive. And children can only learn that if they're met with an invitation to actually communicate their emotions.
Mhm. And thank you so much for really presenting it in a way, a bully and a leader, because over my 20 years in the field of education, we've done so many anti-bullying assemblies and all kinds of different type of curricula, and nothing really works. What the only thing that really works is giving those children leadership opportunities. So the will, the strength, the willpower that they have can actually be channeled into something meaningful rather than to be suppressed or regulated in some artificial way. It just really doesn't work. And so really the question is, do we want to raise bullies or leaders? That was very well put. Thank you. Thank you for that perspective.
Yeah. It's thank you for sharing your research experience on that, because it's also, I feel like one element on that is like how can the bully see their qualities in a positive light, which you do when you give them leadership experiences, right? Like how can I actually see this in a way of creating something rather than destroying something? And that ability has probably not been that experience wasn't there in their experience spectrum, most likely. Otherwise, they wouldn't react that way.
Mhm. Yes, and I couldn't agree with you more. So it's almost creating a channel for that energy, to do something meaningful and to help others rather than suppress because it creates problems for
Mm.
people around them. It's just really the understanding and the almost the wisdom of the adult to know how this energy can be used for the betterment of the world, which is what exactly those children are here to give. Now, Cornelia, if a parent is listening right now who maybe understands all of this, but they feel exhausted, overwhelmed, and maybe even defeated because sometimes it just gets too much. What is like one takeaway, one internal shift, one nugget of wisdom that they take away with and just apply immediately to create the shift in their life and in the dynamics with their child? Something very
I
practical
feel,
that they can do right away.
yeah, I feel when you really change from replying to inquiring, to listening to understand, listening to learn, that's the biggest shift. I feel that parents then usually start to really, the penny is dropping and thinking, oh, wow, if I try to understand what's my child going through, rather than forcing them to do what I want them to do, the dynamic changes. That is the most important starting point for any of these exploration or changes, because then your role changes and it's less exhausting. And well, and I also really think we need to really think about where can we pull in help. Because as I said earlier, we're not meant to do this alone.
Mhm. Yes, I couldn't agree more. Now, this podcast is called Potentiality. When we usually, towards the end of every episode, we explore the large scale impact of the topic that we're discussing. And it could be something that in the moment can feel insignificant, but if we really put it into a long term perspective, it's really when we understand the magnitude of things. So I want to ask you, if we look beyond the parent child dynamic, which is really important, but if we look beyond that and we look into the bigger picture, what is the impact on the larger humanity when strong-willed children are suppressed versus nurtured?
I mean, that is huge. Human by human by human, child by child by child, we're forming the next generation. Now, I feel the biggest impact that we can have is to really open our hearts to kindness and friendliness towards these children, to really understand what is it they are going through, because when we do that, they will be able to do that.
Mm,
Now, if you imagine the ripple effect of kindness and generosity and an open heart interaction where people feel valued for who they are, even if they're going through a challenge, wouldn't that be amazing?
mm,
Yeah. That's really what I feel is on the bigger picture. I think, the work with children and increasing kindness and generosity and um, heart health, so to say, is massive. And every parent
mm,
holds that power for at least one child if they have more and more.
mm. Thank you for that. You really, you said, if I can do it, you can do it. It's really speaking to that shared humanity
Yeah.
within all of us, really connecting at that profoundly human level. And it's about the heart. I teach my clients to think with their heart, not the broken heart that carries a lot of pain and unprocessed emotions, but once you heal your heart and you really connect with the wisdom of it and start
Yeah.
just kind of thinking,
Mm,
with your heart, it
yeah.
transforms your world and everything around you.
Yeah, I feel what I use a lot in my work is the connection to the feeling of compassion. So when
Mhm.
you feel compassion, then start to act from that space with your children. Then the way you decipher, you read situations changes as well. Because when I act from compassion, I can't be violent or aggressive. It's not
Mhm.
possible. So going to compassion, which does not mean I'm allowing everything or I don't have boundaries or anything. It just means I'm holding a strong boundary, but I fill it with compassion.
Mhm.
And I think then we're really on the right track.
But that's a skill to learn, right? Because
That
sometimes you feel
definitely.
like if it's compassion, you go all the way to the end of that spectrum and then you cannot walk all over me. So it's how we really hold that, the healthy boundaries within the container and yet show that ultimate compassion, which I believe starts with self-compassion. Oftentimes, if we cannot be compassionate
100%.
with ourselves, that's not really a true compassion that we can offer to others.
100%. Just like love or respect or any of these positive feelings is something that you cannot offer if you don't feel it. This is where work with the parents becomes so meaningful. The ability to actually treat yourself in a way that makes you available to a relationship so that you don't
Mhm.
just live in an echo chamber of your own pain. That is what really creates the possibility of a parent to parent from that space and an understanding of the role. So if you become really aware that you're actually not fighting these children, it's not a fight, it's not a battle. It should be a guidance and a securing of their safety. Little children, and then we grow with them, and the older they get, we grow with them as well. Our boundaries grow and so on. And it's a dance, right? Depending on the child. If you have several children, parents are aware that, what works for this one child doesn't work for another child. Often I hear from parents, but I'm raising them exactly the same way. Well, first of all, no, because the dynamic of each role plays in there, and every child needs something very different. They're such different characters, right?
Mhm.
So
And I
the
think,
dance is important.
mm,
Sorry.
no, absolutely. And we are different, right? Because every child is born at a different time in our own life. We are a different age. We are in different circumstances, whether it's financial, location, all kinds of things. So
Yeah,
no child is really brought up in the same circumstances, even they are being raised in the same family, because we change from child to child to child, and they need their
yeah,
individual approach. And
absolutely.
I know my own journey is having to find a very attuned and almost tailored approach to each one of my sons because they're completely different. Same parents, absolutely different people.
Yeah, which is sometimes difficult to communicate to the different individual children because they don't always immediately understand. But we have to have the capacity to stand through that.
Mhm. Thank you so much for this beautiful and insightful conversation. I want to ask you if there's something else that you would like to share with our audience that I did not ask about. Anything, any last word that you would like to leave them with?
I think the only thing that I really want people to understand is that strong-willed isn't always what we think strong-willed is. Some children just really have very strong anxiety. And it looks like strong will because they're trying to control their environment. And
Mhm.
if we address it as a strong will, we are actually really missing the point. And we need to find out what is beyond that strong will that we see. What is the feeling? What is it that trying to achieve? And when we do that, we can start to parent it properly.
Thank you. And just in general, going beyond labels, right? And
Yes,
seeing the child as an individual in their wholeness, without necessarily giving a label, and just really helping them unravel moment to moment
yeah,
exactly as they need.
yeah. The
Thank you so
cornering of
much.
labels is so disastrous, actually.
Mhm. Cornelia, if our audience is interested in the work that you do, where can they find you?
Okay, so you can find me on Instagram. My handle is Cornelia Dahinten at .family coach. You can find me on my website, consciouscc.com. I work all over the world, from the Americas to New Zealand. I'm located in Singapore, so people who are in Singapore or travel through Singapore can visit me here and see me in person. Otherwise, you can see me in sessions from wherever you are.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. I want to remind our audience that everything that Cornelia just shared will be in the description box below this video. And also, maybe a reminder that the work that you do and the work that I do is just as impactful if we do it through technology, which is a blessing to have. It connects the entire world. It's better to do it in person, but you're available to anybody in any part of the world. And thank you for doing the work that you do. It is so timely, so needed. We definitely need many Cornelias in order to make a difference in this world, especially at the times of crisis happening everywhere. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Thank you so much, Alina. I also work with couples. That's maybe just for me to add, very often a very powerful space to create change because the couple also mirrors each other, and we can learn so much that we need in parenting from the experience with our partners. And children really benefit from the root of the family tree to be in order, to be healthy and juicy and happy. So I always really love the work with couples as well.
And thank you for mentioning that. And that's really where it starts, because a healthy couple usually raises healthy children. So that's exactly what we want to see. Thank you so much once again. It was a pleasure having you here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your expertise, and just your energy with the world. It radiates so strongly, the positivity and the kindness that you spread. So thank you so much for sharing this space with me, this exploration. It was an honor to be in this conversation, in this exploration with you.
Thank you so much, Alina. Really, thank you for having me and helping me with you to spread the word about this topic.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you tuning in today to this beautiful and insightful episode. I'm grateful for each one of you. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. And if you haven't yet, in order to not miss a single episode in the future, thanks again for being with us, and I will see you next time.